And let's start in Washington, where President Donald Trump has erupted after the Supreme Court struck down his sweeping global tariffs. He's called the decision terrible and labeled some justices fools and lapdogs. Undeterred, Trump announced he will sign an executive order imposing a 10% global tariff for about 5 months, insisting he doesn't need Congress to act. That's despite the 6-3 ruling saying otherwise. On the question of refunds for the struck down tariffs, he's warned that the process could take some 5 years. Let's hear from a scathing Donald Trump.
They also are a, frankly, disgrace to our nation, those justices. They're an automatic no matter how good a case you have. It's a no. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think. But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country.
Let's bring into the conversation Gavin Bade, a trade and economic policy reporter at the Wall Street Journal in Washington. Gavin, when you were first hired for the Wall Street Journal, they said you were there to talk Trump and trade. And I don't think that you've ever heard Trump being so scathing about trade, especially on his own Supreme Court justices. This is quite a moment and quite a reaction.
Yes, quite a moment and quite a reaction. I think what you're hearing there is that as much as this is about Trump's tariffs, it's also about his executive authority. Trump has really he's taken a very broad view of what the president's powers are in his second term. And this is really the first time that he's been pegged back by any sort of external force who said, actually, you've gone too far. You can't do that. So that, that someone might describe it as a petulant reaction. It's just because this is the first time he's found any stop, any control on his power. And he just really does not like that.
And his own trade secretary, Scott Bessent, has just said that he's now lost his leverage. How do you think he'll be reacting to that statement?
Yes, I think that is one of the features of this decision that's really problematic for the Trump administration. He was using this emergency statute. It had never been used for tariffs before, but what it allowed him to do was increase or decrease tariffs almost instantaneously. And that's why they chose this so-called IEEPA statute. The other trade authorities that he has at his disposal that he'll be using in the months to come, they're not quite as fast acting. He can't just change the tariff code at a drop of a hat. And so that makes it much more difficult for him to come out and issue a tariff threat and act on it in the same day as we've seen him do. So it really does put a big limit on his negotiating power here, his leverage with other nations.
And what does it mean for his other tools, his other tariff policies that he could possibly use? I mean, do we expect a different law to come in and a kind of a roundabout way to get those tariffs back?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's kind of a two-step process here. So today we heard him say that they will put into place this 10% global tariff under what's called Section 122. That is only for 150 days. And then by law, if they want to extend that, Congress would have to do a vote. That is unlikely. And so what they will do is they will put these tariffs in place for 150 days, and they will use that time to investigate other tariffs that they can put in place after that. That will be under a separate section of the law called Section 301. So instead of just doing it all in one go like you can do with IEEPA, they have to do, okay, these time-limited tariffs and then follow it up with some more permanent ones later. It's a much more arduous process for them to go through. So while they may be able to recreate the dollar amount of tariffs that they're taking in, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to do it. And they have to basically show their work, which they're not very happy about.
And you talk about the word arduous. I mean, this is not what the American man on the street wants to hear in terms of food prices. What does this mean also ahead of the midterms?
Yeah, I think right now this is putting Trump's trade agenda on a collision course with the midterms. So these new tariffs that he just talked about, they will expire if they come out today as we expect. They will expire in mid-July. And so that will be right, in the heat of the midterm election season. He'll either be asking Congress to vote on these tariffs and extend them, or he'll be coming out with a bunch of new tariffs, and the tariffs will again be in the news cycle. So this is really putting his his trade agenda on a collision course with the midterms. And I think there are going to be a number of vulnerable Republicans who are not happy about that, at least privately.
Yeah, so certainly across the aisle, it's going to be coming back to bite the president. In terms of Wall Street, though, today, we didn't see any panic. Why not?
Well, I think that this is largely what what traders on Wall Street expected. I think we would have seen panic if the tariffs were upheld, but largely I think that the Trump administration has messaged for months now that they would find another way to reimpose these tariffs if they were struck down. And so, looking over the long term, I don't think businesses are looking at a much different tariff landscape than what we just saw. If anything, some countries that had a higher tariff than 10%, thinking about especially Southeast Asian nations that export a lot to the US, they get a break for a little while now because they're only going down to 10%. So I think you'll see a lot of companies try to use this time when they have a 10% tariff to get a lot more imports in, knowing that it could increase in the months to come.
And that's just companies. Now we're talking about $175 billion worth in struck down tariffs. They're now in limbo. I mean, who's going to get refunded? How chaotic is this process going to look like?
Well, Trump himself said today that we could see up to 5 years of litigation about this. It was rather odd. The Supreme Court did not explicitly say what the administration should do with these tariffs. One would reason that if the tariffs were illegal and you collected all that money from American businesses, well, you should pay it back. But Trump has not said that they're going to do this. It would be a difficult process to do because it's just a lot of money on the line here. And it could take a lot more litigation to actually get the government to give this money back to businesses. Now, even if they do that, I don't think that the businesses are going to then again, refund consumers. So you could see a situation where you have a windfall for companies, but consumers are still paying higher prices. That's not going to bode well going into the midterms either. So difficult situation for the Republicans all the way around.
Losing their one bit of leverage. That's what Scott Besser says. Well, we'll see really what effect that has. Gavin Bader, absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. And just to get your outlook there, is all very much happening in terms of the US trade agenda.